Shalom, welcome to the practical Parsha for Parshat Emor. Emor is chapter 21 in the book of Vayikra, in the book of Leviticus. And the first half of the Parsha speaks about the laws of the Kedusha, of the holiness, the sanctity of the children of Aaron, namely the Kohanim, the priests. It's true that collectively, in general, all Jews are called Kohanim. We are like the priests of Hashem. We are like the Kohanim of Hashem, and that is in reference to the entire world. And this is, when God gave us the Torah, He said, Ve'atem tihuli, you shall be to me, Mamleches Kohanim, a kingdom of priests. So if you think about it, for the entire world, we are the select. But within us, within our ranks, there's also a select group that is, so to speak, extra special. We are extra special, they're extra special, and therefore, just like we have special rules compared to the rest of the world, they have special rules very exclusively for them that they have to keep and make sure that they maintain this holiness and this Kedusha. This actually, interestingly, even though we do not have the Holy Temple, at least yet, however, these laws are active and apply, and I'll tell you very interesting anecdotal things that apply still today because of these laws, that you can actually see with your own eyes. Even if you're not a Kohen, you can get to experience it. So let's go first step by step. If you start in the beginning, it says Hashem spoke to Moshe. Hashem said to Moshe. Okay, Hashem didn't speak to Moshe, He said to Moshe. Which is interesting, just to point out that in the Torah we find when Hashem speaks to Moshe, sometimes it says He spoke to him, and He said speak to the people, and sometimes it says He said to him, say to the people. It sounds like the same. It sounds like give me 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But it's not exactly the same. It's very delicately different. In one place, Rashi explains that Dibur is a stronger. Dibur means speaking is stronger, is a stronger tone, so to speak, in a way of a command, a heavy one. Emor is already more on the softer side. Okay? However, in any case, it says over here, speak to the Kohanim, means say to the Kohanim, the sons of Avrohom, and you shall say to them, let him not defile himself with the dead amongst his people. So this is a very important thing. A Kohen is not allowed to defile himself. What does it mean, defile himself? To become what I would call ritually impure. To become tameh, to become impure by means of coming in contact with a dead body. This is very simply the reason why a Kohen cannot go to a cemetery. A Kohen does not go to a cemetery.
Even if it's
Wait, one step at a time. A Kohen, let's say, who happens to be a rabbi, he needs to have a very good backup plan, because if anybody in the community, God forbid, suffers a loss and they need someone to do a funeral, can't do it. No matter how important the person is, no matter how much that person donates to the congregation. He has something which trumps all of that, and that is his sanctity, which was given to him from Hashem, and he cannot override that. Okay? Now, in the time that the Bet HaMikdash stood, it was actually even more severe. Because not only he was not allowed to become impure, but if he did become impure, he cannot do the service now in the Holy Temple. Not only cannot do the service, he cannot enter the Holy Temple. Understand that the truth is, any Jew that is in contact with a dead body cannot enter the Holy Temple. Okay? Cannot enter that, not the entire compound of the Temple Mount, but as the section of it which was considered to be holier than the rest. The inner, so to speak, the inner circle. But, on the other hand, the average Jew is not transgressing, is not doing any prohibition if he or she is impure. Just don't go to the Beit HaMikdash. Don't touch anything that's of sanctuous nature. But otherwise, you don't have to be pure. The only time you'll have an issue, perhaps, is when it comes the eve of Passover, and you need to offer the Passover sacrifice, and you want to be part of it, or if you want, it comes the holidays, the festivals, and you want to do pilgrimage, and you want to come to Beit HaMikdash, then you got to take care of business. But otherwise, when you're back home, no big deal. For a Kohen, it's a big deal. For Kohen, it's not just about not entering the holies and not eating from the holy food. It's also about the actual fact of not becoming impure. And this explains, like I said, why Kohanim cannot go into a cemetery. They cannot officiate. They can't be by funeral. They can be from a distance, but that's it. Moreover, very interesting, I will tell you something interesting, that any Kohen who is careful, who really understands and knows, is informed, wouldn't even go near a cemetery, because many times you have in cemeteries, you have trees growing. And if the trees grow and it protrudes, it's sticking out over outside, anything that's under that canopy of the branches connects, so to speak, it travels. In fact, I'll tell you even more. I'm not saying that it's terribly wrong. You will, perhaps today's day and age, you will find some Kohanim who are doctors, okay? Maybe only sometimes in specific, in certain fields, very limited. But the more religious a Kohen is, the less likely they would become a doctor. Why? Because a doctor has to be in a hospital, especially when you're training. And when you're training, you have to deal with cadavers. You have to deal with part of your training. So that's already a problem. Then you have to be in a hospital. If you're in a hospital and under the same roof, it could be a massive structure. It could be 20 stories high, and it could be, 3 square blocks. But the fact is, if it's under the same roof, even though there's different rooms that divide it, if there is tumah, if there's a dead body in the building, the whole building becomes tameh, or possibly, potentially. So therefore, typically, a Kohen will find a different job. That's why you have, I know I drive here on the highway, they make for good lawyers, Cohen and Cohen.
Yeah.
I guess the lawyers, they kill people, but from a distance.
Yeah.
So it's not a problem. But anyway, getting back to something serious, so they wouldn't do that. In fact, there are some people that even go as far as being careful as not to fly over a cemetery. And I say, you fly over a cemetery, the graves are down there, you can barely see them. But there is a concept, and it's discussed in the Talmud, and it has its applications in halakha and Jewish law, that once there is something there, you view it, the entire ear space going all the way up to the sky is connected. By the way, this is not just a far-fetched thought. Think about it as a far-fetched Jewish mystical thing. No, not at all. It actually applies in practical law, in civil law. When you own a piece of real estate, you own a piece of land, unless stated otherwise, you own the airspace. Now, you can't shoot down planes for flying over the airspace, but you own the airspace. And I'll give you the criteria. If you get the proper zoning and you can build a taller building now, you don't have to purchase air from the city. You just go straight up. That space belongs to you. And if somebody decides to come and build over you, they're encroaching on your property. You go, well, I'm not touching your building. Your building's here. I'm building here. No. This is my airspace. So I'm just trying to illustrate how, therefore, there are people who are very careful, and there actually are some airlines, especially I think El Al, that made special accommodations in places that there are known cemeteries, not to fly over them and to fly a different route. That's to that extent, because they're Kohanim who travel on the plane. I'll tell you furthermore, and I'm not going to get into, give me a moment, I'm not going to get into the details, the technical details that is, but especially in planes traveling to Israel, quite often there's going to be a deceased that's also being transported to be buried in Israel. So what do they do? How do they do it? Does that mean that a Kohen cannot travel on the plane because they're going to be in the same
Same space.
Same cabin, same space, right? It's the same under the same roof, because there may be in the baggage low, there may be a cadaver, or they have to first make sure and start another fight, another reason to get kicked off the plane. All right, what do you do? So for that, thank God, they have, it's not a loophole, it's actually a halachic remedy that actually it has a special box. So the actual box goes within a box that has a hollow space, okay? And that hollow space kind of makes it as its own entity now, and the tumah, the impurity, doesn't, so to speak, spread. So there is no issue. No, it's interesting. Yes, that was going to be your question. You see that? I read minds and I answer questions before they're even asked. Okay, I used to tell that to my students when I taught in grade school. I said, don't ask me the question. I usually try to answer your questions before you ask them. So don't cut me off. No, but it's good. So that's a very important one. Because otherwise, imagine that any Kohen could not travel on a plane. You meant anywhere, or especially to Israel, knowing that Jews typically want to bury, many times want to bury their dead in Israel.
They can fly in El Al.
So I'm saying El Al specifically they worked very closely with the Chevra Kadisha that has this remedy. Again, you notice I didn't call it a loophole. It's a remedy. It's an outright, actual, perfect remedy according to Halakha. So this works very well. But I'm showing you where, for you and me, it's no big deal. You just go. You go to cemetery. You don't go to cemetery. For a Kohen, it's a big deal. It's a big deal because they have to know. Now remember, if we closed our eyes and we opened it, and the Beit HaMikdash is right there in Jerusalem, the Kohanim of today would all need to go through the process of purification. When I say purification, you remember the red heifer, the ashes of the red heifer, and so on. Why? Because everybody today, everybody, without exception, has the status of tamei met, of having become impure by means of contact with a dead body. Why? Because even if a Kohen never went to a cemetery, but they certainly touched somebody that has been to a cemetery, so it transfers up to a certain degree. So therefore, they would have to go through that process of purification. However, for you and me, once you're impure, you're impure. For a Kohen, you don't say, well, listen, anyway I'm impure, anyway I came in contact with a dead body. No. I still, as a Kohen, I still have this active prohibition, active commandment of not becoming any further tamei. Meaning, every act of coming in contact with a dead body or under the roof of it is another act of transgression, of prohibition. That's why Kohanim have to be very, very careful.
And what happened with some family of the Kohanim?
So now let's go to the next. I'm sorry, 1 second. Let's go to the next 2-3 verses. I'll answer all your questions. Go ahead. What's your question?
What happened when you're in the plane? Accident happened and the people died.
That's why every plane from El Al has a special balcony for the Kohanim.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But I didn't know that either. Yeah, it doesn't. There's no balcony on the plane.
No, the balcony had section.
No. There's nothing you can do. I mean,
because accident happened.
No, there's nothing you can do. What are you supposed to do?
But when you landed, you have to go with the process to purification.
But now that's not available. You know what I'm saying? So all you can do, the Kohen, is feel bad, but that is something which we call an onus in Hebrew. Onus in Hebrew means a mishap.
It happened.
And nothing you can do, but you so I'll tell you something interesting, just to his credit, and actually his yahrzeit was several days ago. The Rebbe's secretary, his personal secretary, there's a whole secretariat, but the head secretary, Rabbi Chadakov, of blessed memory, besides being a dedicated servant to the Rebbe, he was a absolute, strict, exact when it came to Jewish law. I want to show you the greatness of a person, illustrate the greatness of a person. Once he didn't feel good, and he felt like he's passing out. He started to pass out. Do you know what came on his lips? Do you know what he said? And he spoke in a very Austrian yekish, like a jerk, very, very. So I'm not going to mimic him because it wouldn't say anything to you. He said, tell all the Kohanim to go out.
Wow.
That's what was in his mind. He thought he's dying. So he couldn't think about himself. What came to his mind? Look at the greatness of a person. There may be Kohanim here. Tell them to leave. In case he dies, they shouldn't be under the same roof. It's their mitzvah.
Wow.
That's the greatness of a person.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying?
That's an total act of selflessness.
Yeah. But it's not only selfless, it's to be mindful in a moment where you're really thinking what's coming across your mind is, I feel like this, I feel like, I'm blanking, I might be dying. And all you can think about is like, hey, go home, tell my wife I love her, go home and tell my kids I love them, but make sure no one else gets affected spiritually. That's an amazing thing that comes to mind related to this story. But anyway, moving on. Verse 2. Except to his kin, to whom he is closely related. So this is what we would call immediate next of kin. Immediate next of kin. That is, for his mother, for his father, for his son, for his daughter, and for his brother. For his virgin sister, to whom he is closely related, who has not yet been married, for her he may be defiled. That means if it's a sister that has not yet been married, so she still belongs to the family, and therefore she is next to kin, then to her he can become impure. Continuing, and by the way it says it in the Hebrew, and you can even see it in the English, what does it really say? If I ask you now to paraphrase, look again in verse 2 and paraphrase. Okay? If I had to paraphrase, and I'm not saying I do any better job than you would, but this is the way I would do it. Except for father, mother, son, daughter, brother, and sister. Right? That is not yet married. Period. What does it say in the verse at the end? For her, he may be defiled. Why does he have to add that? That's superfluous. You said except for, so he can for everyone except for these. Why add the words, for her he may be defiled? The sages tell us, and this is the halacha, because you can read it in the Hebrew, not only for her he may be defiled, but for her he must be defiled. Not only is Hashem saying the restriction is off for these 6, and soon we're going to add in the next verse, going to add his wife, not only is the restriction off, but it's a must. It's not voluntary. It's not saying he could if he wants to. He must. He must. In other words, when it comes to according to the Torah. And now I'll explain to you something very powerful about it. But let's first do the next verse, and then we're going to. Then it says, a husband may not defile himself amongst his people for a wife through whom he becomes profaned. And that is, as we're going to see in the next few verses, if we get to it, there are certain women that a Kohen is not allowed to marry. May be absolutely nothing wrong with the women, but the mere fact that, let's say, a woman was once married and now she's a divorcee, that's kind of the typical one. A Kohen cannot marry a divorcee. A Kohen cannot marry a divorcee. So, if he does marry a divorcee, she is a married woman. It's a real marriage. It may not be, so to speak, totally sanctioned by God, because God said he shouldn't have done it, but the actual effect of marriage is there. So it's his wife. In fact, if he's married to her, that woman, and the children will not be Kohanim anymore, as we'll see it later. However, so that's what the verse is saying. If it's a wife that he gets profaned through her, meaning he's not allowed to be married to her, then he cannot become impure to her. Because he still is a Kohen, but he's like a suspended Kohen, but he still has the sanctity of a Kohen. But if it's a legitimate wife, meaning a wife that he's allowed to marry, according to the Torah, as a Kohen, then how did Hashem say, how did God say to Adam and Eve, to Adam and Chava, that you marry, a person should leave his father and mother, and they should cleave together and become one flesh. So it's like himself. So he has to. So this is the seven next of kin that one, and what did we learn? Not only one as a Kohen, one could, but rather one
must.
Should, or must is a stronger word, become defiled to them. Okay? Still, and this is what I want to tell you, still considering that he must become defiled to them, but not to anyone else. And this will explain an amazing anecdote. Remember I said this, I shared with you already some interesting anecdotes of what happens in transit, what happens, and so on and so forth. But an interesting anecdote, and it's something factual, you can see it, in every proper cemetery. When I say a proper cemetery, I mean one that's following halakha. There are places that are Jewish cemeteries, but maybe not necessarily follow it to the full letter of the halakha. You will find something interesting, but typical. The Kohanim are always buried the front row. Not because it's a better view, or near the gate, near the end, in a place where the family that has to go there doesn't have to walk through graves or defile them because they're not allowed to. The Torah doesn't say now, okay, for this period of time it's suspended and you can go and come and become defiled. No, they can defile themselves for the father, for the mother, for God forbid if a son or a daughter died, for a brother or sister. Only for them. Only for them. You understand? And that is why you'll find it in the road, especially in the cemeteries that today, modern cemeteries that have even a road where you can pull it in a car. Mm-hmm. So interesting to think about it. When you're in a car, you're like in a separate entity. You're not even in the cemetery. Mm-hmm. So if you're in the car and you come out just there, just to be by the funeral of one's father or mother, that's exactly what the Torah is saying. That's why you'll see. Sometimes you can even tell on the tombstone, first of all, if you read it and it says, typically if it's a Kohen, you say Ha-Kohen, the Kohen at the end, not only the name. Even if the name is Friedman, which is a typical name for Kohanim in many cases, or it could be, or Rothstein, or whatever it is, it will say Roth, it will say Ha-Kohen, the Kohen, or the Levite. However, in some cases, even sometimes they put out the symbol, or the Kohanim use, the way they use the hand, they hold the hands during the blessing, and some places where they put symbols on the tombstone, so we even have that on the top of the tombstone, to recognize that it's a Kohen. Sadly, what? The symbol is that I saw the hands like this. Okay, now that's not from Star Wars. No, it's because when they do the Birkat Kohanim, they hold their hands like this. I will tell you, and I know some people will think it's very, very sad, but there's a great likelihood that a Kohen that gets buried will not have visitors. At least not his sons, because it doesn't say that you can continuously and endlessly, you understand, or indefinitely become impure. It's just when they die, the burial, to say goodbye, and that. But later, it doesn't give you a right as a Kohen, to come to visit to the cemetery. That's why in some places they even do it near the gate, so you can feel like you came, but you're not in the cemetery, there's no trees over it, no issues. I'm just explaining. So now you know a very interesting fact of Jewish life, death, which is part of Jewish life. It's interesting. Now, I do want to add, and it's not just adding, but this is something extremely significant. And this really has a very, very strong application. When it comes to the burial of great tzaddikim, the real righteous. I'm not talking about people who say that they're righteous, but the real, true righteous.
The recognized ones.
The ones that are truly righteous. You know when you know someone's truly righteous. That even those who are jealous and therefore their opponents, even they say that this is a righteous person. I don't agree with them, but he's a righteous person. When your friends are saying you're a righteous person, they're biased. But even when somebody along the lines, in the early days of the Hasidic movement, you know that there were many, many opponents in the Hasidic movement. So once two great rabbis, who one was represented in the Hasidic, a big Hasidic Rebbe, and the other was one of the great minds, the great rabbis of what we call the opposition, the Misnagim. And he said to him, you guys are a bunch of lowlifes and everything else. You guys. So he said to him, I will prove to you that that's not true and that even you admire us. So he said to him, because even you would not mind that your son should be like me. He said, you're right. That's a tzaddik.
But why the opposition?
No, we're not having a class now.
Yeah.
Why the opposition? First of all, understand that we're dealing with Jews. Second of all, no, it wasn't just God forbid, just to create controversy and discord. It was based, but it's not. Now is not the place nor the time to discuss it. It's a different time. I'll just bring out an interesting point. Getting back to it, when it comes to the burial site of true tzaddikim, like you said, the recognized great holy people. Even a kohen could go to the burial place of a tzaddik. Before you tell every kohen in the world, no problem, you can go whatever you want, to any great famous rabbi, let me first, give you the details and just explain. This is based on a story in the Talmud, when Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the great Rabbi Yehuda, the one who authored, the one who compiled the Mishnah. Without him, we wouldn't have the Talmud today. We wouldn't have any Jewish law. He was the one who put it together.
Wow.
When he passed away, and he was known as, one of his AKAs was Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Our rabbi, the Holy One. All the rabbis were holy, but he was exceptionally pious, exceptionally holy, and he stood out. When he passed away, the sages announced, and they said, that even Kohanim could go, because by the body of Rabbi Yehuda there's no impurity. And the explanation that's given is because what causes the impurity of death, what is it about death, is because the angel of death, when he touches the body, he brings a certain, almost like injects the body with a certain impurity. Imagine like he injects it in order to take away the soul, he puts in a certain black dye, and so there's a certain contamination there. But when it comes to the holy tzaddikim, the angel of death is not the messenger that takes care of business. True, Hashem has his plan, and why they pass away, they don't live forever. That's only in the realm of God to answer. But as far as who takes away the neshama, it's Hashem himself. So there's no impurity that exchanges hands there. And therefore there's no issue. And therefore, if you go today, for example, you go to New York, you go to Queens, which is, by the way, I totally encourage everybody to do this. You have to make sure to, at some point, to go to the Rebbe, and it's in very close proximity to JFK, to the airport, that you don't even have to travel anywhere. It's within 10-15 minutes you're there. Traffic is another story, but it's not even that far. The Rebbe and the previous Rebbe are buried side by side, and Kohanim go there. In fact, and you'll appreciate it when you go there, they did, very cleverly, they constructed on the path that goes from the entrance to the actual, what we call the ohel, literally means the tent, the actual holy burial place of the Rebbe, which is in a small enclosure with an open roof. They actually put up on both sides of the path, there's a gate that's about this high, okay? And it's a gate. However, according to halacha, according to Jewish law, when you have a gate, even though there are holes, it's perforated, but within a certain close proximity, a certain closeness, then it's considered as if it's a solid wall. So if it's less than 3 tfachim, then it's considered, so you have the prongs pretty close to each other, then it's like one solid wall, and if it's at least what's called 10 tfachim high. Tefach is about a fist breadth, figure it's about 3.5, let's say 4 feet high. This is about 5 feet, 4 feet high. It's considered to be like a solid wall. Thus, the Kohanim are not walking through a cemetery. They're walking in a separate domain, and they go straight into the Rebbe's. However, it's important for anyone here, for anyone listening, that if someone is a Kohen, they cannot take this literally and go just to any place that a holy tzaddik is buried. And I'll explain to you why. Especially when it comes, let's say, for example, Europe. There are places where great, great rabbis are buried. In fact, even the Chabad rabbis, we all buried. The Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid HaMizrich, and other great, 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 great rabbis, that certainly there's no issue in going to their grave. The issue, however, is that they were all buried in cemeteries. in Jewish cemeteries, maybe at the edge, maybe in the middle, we don't know. Over the years that a lot of these cemeteries were destroyed or decayed, the road is now, if that's an actual road, there's no graves under it. No one buried under it. So a Kohen, for me and you, it's not a problem. We're not deliberately stepping on a grave, which we're not allowed to do. But we are going to them. But for a Kohen, it's an issue. So that's why the only places really Kohanim could really go is in a place like by the Rebbe. There are other, like in Israel, you have the Baba Sali, which was a great Moroccan Kabbalist that's buried. But it's a fresh place. It's a new grave.
It's built
not
for
that
that.
old that that if you're going on a road, on a paved road, there's certainly no. But let's say if it comes, for example, if you go to other ancient cemeteries in Israel, like Tzfat, where you have some of the greatest rabbis, you have some of the sages of the Talmud, you have a prophet, Hoshea ben Be'eri, that's buried here at the bottom of the mountain. Yeah. In Israel, you have cemeteries going all the way back and places of burial that we know that have been recorded. I'll tell you in a moment how we know. You have, for example, the holy Arizal, okay, the father of modern day Kabbalah, transmitter of Kabbalah. But you can't go to their graves, not because of their graves, but because what might be around them or what may be under, you don't know. If we already mentioned it, it's interesting that how do we know, for example, where Rabbi Akiva was buried? We know his grave. Where great sages, you're talking about, they passed away 2,000 years ago, close to 2,000 years ago. Hoshea ben Be'eri, like I just said, the prophet, we know where he's buried. We know where the 12 tribes are buried. Wow, who kept that? They kept the markings all these years? So we know that the Arizal, just mentioned his name, the Arizal, was such a holy man. When people go to a very good sporting goods store and they buy a metal detector or something with sonar and they're able to have good equipment, good detective, and they can tell if there's something underground. Well, he had very good vision, very good spiritual vision. And he went around and he said, here is buried Rabbi Akiva, here is buried this sage. That's how we know where they're buried. Imagine, this is like 500 years ago, give or take. Okay? But that's something like, wow. But the problem is you cannot go to these because they didn't say what's around it is clear. So they were, you have to assume that they're, again, this is only if somebody is a Kohen. Wow. Interesting?
Yeah. Very.
Now, I did say that we need to find and know practical applications of it to us. Okay, you'll soon see one. Let's just read quickly from verse 5 through verse 9. And you'll see, because I want to introduce just several other important rules pertaining to priesthood, to Kohanim. They shall not make baldness on their heads, and the corners of their beards they shall not shave, and they shall not make gashes in their flesh. Apparently, by the way, these two laws apply also to a regular Israelite. It's just putting an extra prohibition because of their higher status. But really, and also it fills us in on some of the details, which is not important to go into, but we're talking about the gashes, and you can still see that some crazy religions have it today, but apparently the idol worshippers, if somebody would die, they would actually slash themselves and make all kinds of gashes and stuff. And they have these groups that do it still in Iraq, I don't know, crazy stuff. By the way, all this crazy stuff is not just fantasy. There's these things exist. Some people would shave their heads bald. I don't know if this is where skinheads come from, but whatever it is. Then it says, they shall be holy to their God, and they shall not profane the name of their God. Why? Because the fire offerings of Hashem, the bread of their God, so to speak, the food of the God, they offer, and they must therefore be holy. A harlot or a profane woman, they shall not marry. Okay, now what does it mean, profane woman? If, let's say, a Kohen married a woman he's not allowed to marry, and she had a daughter. Now, a girl, in the first place, wouldn't really have all the restrictions of kahuna, of priesthood. But the fact that she's the daughter of a Kohen, which has become profane because he married, let's say, a divorcee, she cannot marry a Kohen. If she does, then it will carry over. You understand? Whereas a regular Jewish girl, no problem, as long as her mother. That's why if somebody is a Kohen, they have to actually check the pedigree of the girls and the boys that they're going to marry all the way back. A woman divorced from her husband, they shall not marry. for he is holy to his God. Now, whatever the reason is, it's not important. This is the law. And this, by the way, is a big, big problem. I know people with the last name Kohen, and the father technically was a Kohen, that they are not Kohanim. Of course, it wasn't done intentionally. When they were, the parents maybe were not educated, they weren't yet religious, they didn't know, but they married, but the fact is the fact. So the children are not Kohanim. Okay? And that's why, by the way, interestingly, they have this group that developed this whole thing, that the people who are Kohanim, they have a very unique, which is true, they carry a very unique DNA. But you can see from here that you can have the DNA, but it doesn't conclusively tell you if the person is a Kohen or not. Why? Because it could be the son of a divorcee. The DNA doesn't tell you who, divorce. There's one marker in there, right? You shall, okay, this is the one I wanted to focus on. You shall make him holy, for he offers the bread of your God. He shall be holy unto you, for I, Hashem, am holy, who makes you holy. So it says over here, in plain, simple English, you shall make him holy. He shall be holy to you. Why? Because I am holy, says Hashem. I ask you a question. If Hashem is holy, who made the Kohen holy? Why is the Kohen holy? Because Hashem made him holy. So what exactly does it mean? Or how do I explain, how do I quantify this? What do I need to do to make the Kohen holy? What happens? How does he become holy? He's holy already. What can I give him that Hashem hasn't given him? The answer is, the word holy means separate. The true meaning of the Hebrew word holy, kadosh, means to be separate. To stand a step above, a cut above. And this is what it means. So the actual practical application, and this is really, for us, what we need to know is that you always treat the Kohen in a holier status. And with preference, and therefore priority. Not because of the person, but like Hashem says, because I am holy, because what he carries, what he represents. He represents, even if he is, and this is interesting. Remember, when we read the Torah, that's the best example. When we read the Torah, you can have the senior rabbi in the shul, the greatest scholar that's 80 years old, and then you have a 13-year-old boy who's a Kohen. Who do you call up first? The Kohen. Mm-hmm. Because he just became bar mitzvah. He's just eligible to get an aliyah. He didn't have enough time to become a scholar, let alone top scholar. And you're such a great rabbi and everything, and yet you call up the Kohen first. Why? Because Hashem says it's not about who he is, it's about me, and he represents that. Furthermore, in any time, any situation where you have certain honors or an honor that has to be dispensed, and there's no other reason to give it to someone else, meaning, of course, if you have, let's say, I'm giving an example, at a wedding, if you have honors, let's say, to give specifically the blessings to the father of the bride, to the uncle of the bride, to the grandfather, that's already a different story. Or in a Brit Milah, you call up, you honor, let's say, the grandfather or an uncle to be the sandak and things like that. But in the case where there isn't any specific preference, then you have to give it to the Kohen. Then you honor the Kohen. Let's say typically you'll see to lead the blessing after the meal. Say, is there a Kohen? Let the Kohen lead. Unless you have, of course, as a bar mitzvah boy, and it says bar mitzvah, then you honor him because he is now the guest of honor. And likewise, okay? Always give him preference, always give him first. I want to share with you something else that's very, very practical. And it's already a cut above. By the Rebbe, we saw this. The Rebbe was very strict about this. It says over here, you should keep him holy. You should treat him with holiness. Why? Because of Hashem's holiness. Because he is a good guy or big guy. It's interesting. By the Rebbe did not allow a Kohen to serve him. And I can tell you, I know, factually, one of the very important rabbis in Chabad, he passed away in the 80s, but I remember him, and he was one of the people in charge, and Rabbi Shul, and so on. He was an important personality. He was a Kohen. His last name is Katz. Katz, by the way, is typically a Kohen's name, because Katz is an acronym for Kohen Tzedek. Kohen Tzedek means righteous righteous Kohen. That's where the name Katz comes from. It's a Kohen. Yeah? Katz, Kohen, Kagan. Kagan is in Russian, in certain places in Russia, in that region, they don't pronounce the H well. So Kahan is also Kohen, it's the same thing. Kahan became Kagan. Kagan. Kahanovich, Kaganovich, these are all Kohen names. But then again, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone's a Kohen because they have the name Katz. It could be grandfather's Katz, married out, and I'm no longer a Kohen if my name might be Katz. Or Katzowitz. No. Anyway, Brashevitzky. Anyway, my name's very similar, Brashevitzky. Anyway, so close, but not no cigar.
You are a Kohen.
Yeah, I'm a Kohen. I once had a friend that was a Kohen, and I know some Kohanim, but that's the closest I've gotten to that. But this thing here, so I want to say, going back to all jokes aside, Rabbi Katz, he is Moshe Pinchas Katz, very important personality. He was, in the sense, a survivor. He lost his whole family in Poland. He was one of the students from the Lubavitch Yeshiva that transplanted from Europe and was able to survive by being in Shanghai. I mean, make a long story short, imagine for him, being a chassid of the Rebbe, how much it meant for him to be able to have the honor to be the one to pour the wine for the Rebbe. To serve the Rebbe, to pour the wine. When they came to big gatherings, they would sit down. There was somebody who the Rebbe didn't allow. The Rebbe didn't accept it. Why? Because he's a Kohen. How can he serve me? Even though for him it's not considered a burden. Imagine what kind of honor it is. Instead, for a long period of time, his brother-in-law, who also was a very important person, he was the dean, the Rosh Yeshiva of the Central Lubavitch Yeshiva, but he was the one who had that honor, because he was not a Kohen. I'm just showing you to what extent Rebbe was very strict about this rule. A Kohen should not serve. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that if I have a business and I won't give my employee, I won't give a Kohen a job to be an employee because he might have to serve me. I mean, please don't ruin his life. You have an opportunity. I'm talking about in a case like this where it's totally voluntary and so on. The Rebbe, even though the Rebbe took away from him in a sense that privilege, but it's not about him. Also, we know, let's say, for example, on Purim, when you're supposed to give mishloach manot, you're supposed to give gifts of food, even though the rule is you're supposed to give it to one person at least, but the Rebbe always gave to three: Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael. So, but he Kohen first. So you see that this is very, very, very important thing in Jewish life. Anyway, as I said when we started the class, the truth is we are all, as Hashem said, a kingdom of priests. And just like we are told here that we have to recognize the sanctity of the priests, may the day that Mashiach comes, and as it says, the whole world will recognize the greatness of Hashem, and thus they will recognize this that Hashem said, that we are all a Mamlechet Kohanim, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Amen. I just want to mention one more rule that the Rebbe was very, very strict on. He gave strong recommendation about, and that is, interesting thing, there's a statement the Talmud makes that a Kohen should not allow his daughter, because a Kohen has such a high status, should not allow his daughter to marry an ignoramus, an Am Haaretz, somebody who's not learned. Because it's basically saying, we're taking her from being the daughter of a Kohen to being the wife of a simple man. Somebody doesn't know Torah. Now, so the Rebbe, many times, and it became a staple, we know the custom already, that if somebody a boy, a young yeshiva student gets engaged to a daughter of a Kohen, to be sure to have study at least one tractate, one full tract. It doesn't have to be the bigger ones, it can be the small ones with 30, 40 pages, tractate of Talmud, because the rule is that once somebody is versed, somebody's knowledgeable, one tractate, he already has the status of a learned person. But the Rebbe was actually strict about it. So whoever marries you needs to have a status. Anyway, shalom.